You open your phone, you scroll for 11 minutes, you put it down, you pick it back up. You've seen 47 different lives in the time it took to drink your morning coffee, and somehow, by the end of it, you feel less sure of your own life than when you started.
That's uncomfortably specific because that's not a bad morning. For a lot of people, that's just Tuesday.
And here's what nobody names clearly enough. That feeling isn't boredom. It isn't laziness. It's paralysis. You are not stuck because you have too few options. You are stuck because you have too many. And your brain, which was never built for this volume, is quietly shutting down under the weight of it.
So the thing we call freedom, all these choices, all these possibilities, all these paths other people seem to be living so perfectly, is actually functioning more like a prison.
A mental prison with no visible walls, where you can see every door, but you can't walk through any of them, because the moment you move toward one, you're already imagining what's behind the others.
And most of us never stop long enough to realize that the infinite scroll isn't showing us possibility, it's showing us a trap. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Welcome to the Wiser Hour, where we sit at the intersection of philosophy, psychology, and real life, and try to make sense of the things that quietly make us miserable without us ever quite understanding why. Today's topic is one of the most quietly devastating forces in modern life, the paradox of choice and personal stagnation.
Hey everyone, really glad you're here for this one, because I think today is one of those episodes where by the end, you're going to look at your own daily patterns completely differently. And that shift is the whole point.
We're going to move through this in layers: the biology of what too many choices actually does to your brain, the social media engine that makes it catastrophically worse, the psychology of why committing to anything feels genuinely terrifying right now, and what you can actually do to break the pattern.
And if the Wiser Hour is a show that makes you think differently about your own life, follow or subscribe right now so you never miss an episode. It genuinely helps this community grow.
And here's what we want you to hold as we go. Think about one area of your life where you've been stuck, not for lack of options, but because there seem to be too many. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to it.
All right, let's get into it.
The philosopher Barry Schwartz, who wrote what is arguably the most important book on this subject, built his entire argument on a paradox that Aristotle never had to face, but would have recognized immediately. More choice, Schwartz argued, does not produce more freedom. Past a certain threshold, it produces less.
And that feels counterintuitive, because everything about modern culture tells us the opposite. That options are good, that freedom is having more of them, that the person with the most possibilities is the most free.
And Aristotle would push back on that directly. His concept of eudaimonia, genuine human flourishing, was not about having the most options. It was about living in alignment with your nature and your values through sustained, committed action. Aristotle understood something we've collectively forgotten. The good life requires direction, and direction, by definition, means choosing one path and walking it.
Which means every path you don't take has to be released. And that's the part we struggle with now more than ever.
Building Soren Kierkegaard, who was brilliant at naming the specific texture of modern anxiety before modernity fully arrived, wrote about what he called the dizziness of freedom. His insight was that genuine freedom is not the presence of unlimited options. It is the terror that comes with them. When anything is possible, nothing feels safe to choose. The vertigo of infinite possibility is its own form of paralysis.
The dizziness of freedom. That's exactly what scrolling through Instagram at midnight feels like, isn't it? That low-grade vertigo of, I could be doing any of this, living any of these lives, making any of these choices, and I'm here, doing nothing.
And the Stoics had a name for the trap underneath that vertigo. They called it the confusion between preferred indifference, things that are nice to have, and genuine goods, things that actually constitute a well-lived life. Marcus Aurelius wrote repeatedly about the danger of diffusing your attention across too many desires. Confine yourself to the present, he wrote, not because the future doesn't matter, but because the person who lives everywhere lives nowhere.
So Stoicism is essentially saying the disciplined narrowing of focus is not a limitation, it's a prerequisite for any real progress.
Now, let's bring in the thinker who named this most precisely for modern life, The psychologist and philosopher Erich Fromm wrote a book in 1941 called Escape from Freedom, and its central argument is deeply uncomfortable. He said that when human beings are given too much freedom, too many options, too much open space, many of them don't flourish, they panic, and then they find ways to escape back into structure, conformity, and the comfort of following what everyone else seems to be doing.
Which is exactly what the scroll is. It's not freedom, it's a structured escape from the anxiety of freedom, dressed up as inspiration.
And Buddhism offers what might be the cleanest philosophical frame for all of this. The Buddhist teaching on attachment, Upadana, says that suffering is caused by having choices. It's caused by clinging. The mind that can't commit is a mind that's clinging to every possibility simultaneously, and you cannot move forward when your hands are holding everything at once.
Here's something worth sitting with. Is there a choice you've been avoiding, not because you don't know what you want, but because committing would mean letting go of the other versions of your life you've been quietly holding on to? Drop it in the comments, because I think more people are in that exact place than anyone admits.
And what's extraordinary is that modern psychology and neuroscience have mapped exactly what this does to the human brain in ways that are measurable, documented, and should genuinely alarm us. So what does psychology tell us about this? Let's start with the biology, because this isn't just a mindset problem. Decision-making uses the same finite cognitive resource as willpower, the same fuel, and that fuel depletes across the day with every choice you make, including the tiny ones.
Even tiny choices, like what to have for breakfast, which route to take, whether to answer that message now or later.
Exactly. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on what he called ego depletion showed that the mental energy available for self-regulation and decision-making is genuinely finite. And modern life forces the average person to make somewhere between 33,000 and 35,000 decisions per day. Most of them small, most of them barely conscious, but all of them drawing from the same reservoir.
So by the time you get to the moment in the day when you need to make a real decision, start the business, commit to the habit, have the difficult conversation, your brain is already running on empty. And the path of least resistance isn't weakness, it's biology.
Which is precisely why you open Netflix instead of working on the thing you said mattered. It's not a character flaw, it's decision fatigue arriving exactly when you need capacity the most.
And then social media steps in and makes it catastrophically worse.
Barry Schwartz, whose research on the paradox of choice is foundational here, demonstrated that presenting people with more options doesn't increase satisfaction, it increases anxiety, regret, and what he called opportunity cost thinking. Every choice you make activates a mental accounting of everything you didn't choose, and the more options you were aware of, the higher that psychological cost.
So you're not just choosing a career path or a relationship or a creative project. You're choosing it against the backdrop of every alternative lifestyle you've consumed online that week, which means every decision carries the weight of 1,000 comparisons.
And social media has engineered a specific cognitive distortion that makes this worse. It presents only the outcomes of other people's choices, never the years of struggle, uncertainty, and failure that preceded them. So your brain creates what psychologists call a false reference point. You compare your real life, with its full complexity and difficulty, to the curated highlight reel of someone else's best moments. And in that comparison, you will always lose.
And then you don't commit to your own path because somewhere in the back of your mind, you're waiting for a version of it that looks as clean and certain as what you see on a screen, which never comes because that version doesn't exist.
This connects directly to what psychologist Daniel Kahneman identified as anticipatory regret. We don't just fear making the wrong choice in the present, we pre-experience the regret we imagine feeling in the future if someone else's path turns out to look better than ours. We are paralyzed by a feeling that hasn't happened yet, triggered by a success story that's been filtered, curated, and stripped of everything real.
Have you ever talked yourself out of a decision not because it was wrong, but because you could already picture yourself regretting it after seeing something on Instagram 6 months later? That's anticipatory regret, and it's one of the most effective brakes on human action ever identified.
And this brings us to one of the most practically important findings in this entire field. Psychologist Herbert Simon identified two fundamentally different decision-making styles. Maximizers, people who need to find the absolute best option before committing, and satisficers, people who identify clear criteria and commit to the first option that meets them. The research is unambiguous. Maximizers make objectively better choices by external measures, and they are statistically significantly less happy.
So the person who chose carefully, compared everything, and found the optimal path is less satisfied than the person who chose something good enough and started moving.
Because the satisficer spent their energy on building, and the maximizer spent their energy on comparing. And comparing never ends. There is always another option to evaluate, always another life to measure yours against. The maximizing mindset is a treadmill with no finish line.
So, knowing all of this, what can we actually do to break this pattern?
That's exactly where we're going.
That's the part I've been waiting for.
Here's where it gets actionable. And the thread running through every one of these strategies is the same: reduction, not addition. The answer to too many choices is never more information. It is intentional constraint.
And I want to name something before we get into the strategies. A lot of us intellectually understand the paradox of choice. We've nodded along to everything we just discussed, and we still open the app 30 minutes later. So these strategies have to be structural, not just attitudinal.
The first is what writer Cal Newport calls digital minimalism, and the core principle is simple. You cannot reduce choice anxiety while you are continuously flooding your mind with alternate lives. The inputs have to be controlled. That doesn't mean deleting everything. It means being deliberate. Set specific windows for social media. Remove it from your phone's home screen. Turn off notifications. Not because the content is evil, but because your brain cannot simultaneously consume infinite possibilities and commit to a single direction. Those two things are neurologically incompatible.
And I want to name something in my own experience. Even a week of significantly reduced social consumption produces a kind of quiet clarity that's almost disorienting at first, because you start actually hearing what you want instead of what you've been absorbing from everyone else.
The second strategy is what I'd call the power of constraints, and this is where philosophy and practicality converge beautifully. Instead of surveying the full landscape of your options, give yourself 2 or 3. That's it. Not what should I do with my life, but given what I value, here are the only 3 directions worth seriously considering. Constraint is not a limitation of freedom, it is the condition for action.
And the Stoics practiced this deliberately. Marcus Aurelius didn't ask, what is every possible response to this problem? He asked, what does virtue require here? He gave himself one criterion, and that one criterion made the decision almost automatic.
The same principle applies practically. When you are trying to build a new habit, don't give yourself 10 approaches to try. Pick one method. Run it for 60 days. The constraint is the strategy.
This is the hardest one for me personally, because the maximizer instinct says, but what if there's a better method I haven't found yet? And the answer that actually works is, there probably is, and you'll find it faster by moving than by researching.
The third strategy is what I'd call commitment as freedom. And this is the deepest reframe in today's episode. We think of commitment as closing doors, as loss, as giving up possibility. But the Stoics and the existentialists both pointed to the same truth. Genuine freedom only exists on the other side of commitment. The person who has chosen nothing is not free. They are suspended. Real agency, the experience of actually directing your own life, only begins when you close the other doors and walk through one.
Sartre said we are condemned to be free, but his point was that freedom without commitment is not liberation, it's anguish. The act of choosing fully and without constant reevaluation is what transforms possibility into a life.
So here's what this looks like concretely. Identify the one area where you've been stuck longest. Name one path, not the perfect path, a good enough path. Set a minimum commitment period, 90 days, 6 months. And during that period, remove the evaluation. You're not asking, is this the right choice? You're asking, how do I make this choice work? That shift from evaluation to execution is where stagnation ends.
Here's what we want you to do this week. Name one area where social media makes you feel behind or stuck, and name one commitment you will make regardless of what you see online. Drop it in the comments, because making it public is itself a form of commitment, and this community will hold you to it. Okay, let's bring it all together.
If there's one idea I want you to carry out of today, it's this. The modern world has confused the presence of options with the presence of freedom, and they are not the same thing. Options without commitment produce anxiety. Action without perfection produces a life. Those are very different destinations.
This episode genuinely shifted something for me in how I think about my own patterns, because I've framed a lot of my indecision as being thoughtful, as being careful, as not wanting to make the wrong move. And I think today named what that actually is. It's the maximizer instinct. And the maximizer instinct left unchecked is just a sophisticated way of standing still.
And this is not a personal failing unique to any one person. Kierkegaard's dizziness of freedom, Fromm's escape from freedom, Schwartz's paradox of choice, this has been the human condition at every point when options expanded faster than the wisdom to navigate them. We are living through the most acute version of that expansion in history. The struggle makes sense. What matters is what we do with that understanding.
So here's the question we want to leave you with, and we want your real answer in the comments. What is the one choice you've been sitting on the edge of? Not because you don't know the answer, but because committing to it means letting go of everything else. What would you do if you decided right now that good enough and moving was more valuable than perfect and waiting?
There is no version of a well-lived life that doesn't require closing some doors. The question is whether you close them consciously by choosing, or whether time closes them for you by default. Both are a choice. Only one of them is yours.
Drop your answer in the comments. This community's honesty with each other is one of the most valuable things about this space, and we genuinely read what you share.
And that brings us to our closing thoughts. So here's what we covered today. Philosophically, from Aristotle's eudaimonia to Kierkegaard's dizziness of freedom, from the Stoic discipline of focus to the Buddhist teaching on attachment, every tradition pointed toward the same truth. Direction requires commitment, and commitment requires release.
Psychologically, decision fatigue depleting the fuel for real choices, the comparison engine of social media creating a false reference point, anticipatory regret paralyzing action before it begins, and the maximizer trap keeping the most careful people the most stuck.
And practically, digital minimalism to control the inputs, the power of constraints to create actionable focus, and commitment itself as the only genuine form of freedom.
Personal growth isn't about finding the perfect choice. It's about making a choice, and then making it the right one through effort, patience, and the willingness to stop looking over your shoulder at what else was on the table.
And if today felt like a mirror for something you've been carrying, be patient with yourself. This pattern is not a character flaw. It is a rational response to an irrational amount of stimulation. Understanding it is the first step. Moving, imperfectly, incompletely, but actually moving is the second.
If this episode gave you something real to think about, share it with someone who's been stuck at a crossroads. Like the video, subscribe to the Wiser Hour, and leave that commitment in the comments. Let's hold each other to it.
Next episode, we're going somewhere that connects directly to everything we talked about today. A question about identity, change, and why becoming someone new is so much harder than it should be. Stay close. You won't want to miss it.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for thinking. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing. This is the Wiser Hour.